Number 10. Baipili Uvasi and Tirupathy Rao. In June of 2018, a black bear mauled to death a couple in southern India before aggressively defending itself from villagers trying to stop its rampage. 50-year-old Baipili Uvasi was ambushed by the bear in a cashew orchard from Yaramukham village in Andhra Pradesh. Her husband, Tirupathy Rao, heard the attack and intervened. The couple both sustained critical injuries and were later pronounced dead. Several men from the village were hurt as they tried to rescue them by attacking the bear with clubs and rocks. One man was pinned to the ground after the bear had clamped its jaws on his arm. Others were bitten and clawed, but they ultimately managed to beat the bear to death. In the incident's aftermath, 7 people had to be taken to the hospital with severe injuries. But Uvasi and Rao were the only fatalities reported. A forest ranger told a media outlet that compensation would be paid to the victim's family. One local claimed that the authorities hadn't taken any measures to prevent black bear attacks, even though they'd become frequent in the area. Number 9. Black bear selfie. In 2020, 3 female hikers had a dangerously close encounter with a black bear on a trail in Mexico's Chipinque Ecological Park. They remained calm as the animal approached them, as it seemed to only be curious and didn't behave aggressively. The bear then got up on its hind legs and started sniffing one of the women's hair. She kept her composure and even seized the opportunity to snap a selfie with the animal. As if on cue, the bear stood upright just long enough for the woman to take the picture. It then dropped down and gently swatted at her legs before walking away. The interaction was captured on camera by another park visitor, and the video subsequently became viral. Former basketball player Rex Chapman was among the many social media users that reacted to it. He expressed bewilderment at the woman's behavior under pressure, writing, "Oh my goodness, she's a rock." Black bears are ferocious animals, and understandably so. Other users remarked how lucky the women had been that the black bear hadn't become aggressive. Number 8. Erin McKenzie. In July of 2020, Canadian woman Erin McKenzie was running with her dogs at Ryded Mountain National Park. After going up a steep hill, the 27-year-old encountered a large black bear. It was surprised by the woman and almost instantly struck her in the face with its paw. The blow almost knocked Mackenzie out. It also swung at her back, leaving large claw marks on her left shoulder. The bear got up on its hind legs but then retreated without inflicting further damage. Mackenzie, who was about 3 miles from her car, was left with a deep gash on her face that ran from her eye to her nostril. The cut was less than 1/3 of an inch from her eye. She walked 40 minutes back to her car, where she was met by her boyfriend and taken to a hospital. Doctors decided not to stitch up the wound on her face for fear of infection, in spite of what was likely due to become a large scar. Mackenzie considered herself fortunate not to have lost her eye. Number 7. Unnamed woman in Colorado. In May of 2021, a woman was attacked and partially eaten by black bears in an area north of Durango, Colorado. The unnamed 39-year-old had been out walking her dogs. The woman's boyfriend became concerned after they'd returned home without her at around 8:30 p.m. About an hour later, he called the emergency services after finding her mauled body off a highway. A dog team from the U.S. Department of Agriculture located a sow with 2 younger bears in the area. The animals were euthanized as they were deemed dangerous enough to cause additional attacks. A necropsy found traces of human remains in the stomachs of 2 bears. It's unclear what had prompted them to attack the woman. According to a preliminary examination, the bears seemed healthy and they had sufficient fat stores following their winter hibernation. One of the proposed theories was that the victim or her dogs had surprised the sow, prompting her to aggressively defend the yearlings. Number 6. Catherine Sweat Mueller. In 2019, a Minnesota woman was killed by a black bear on a remote island in Canada. 62-year-old Catherine Sweat Mueller was vacationing with her parents, who were both in their 80s, at Red Pine Island on Rainy Lake. She'd heard her 2 dogs barking outside and left the cabin to investigate. When Sweat Mueller didn't return, her parents called the authorities. Within 30 minutes, officers arrived at the island by boat. It took search crews a while to locate the victim because there was a lot of underbrush and multiple different trails. They eventually found a black bear aged between 1 and 2 standing over Sweat Mueller's partially eaten body. A fully grown female and another yearling were spotted nearby, and officers reported they were making noises with their mouths and stomping. They shot dead the bear who they believed had been responsible for the fatal mauling. Other visitors were informed of the attack, which was considered a rare occurrence both in Ontario and Minnesota. Number 5. Stephanie Blaise. 44-year-old Stephanie Blaise was fatally mauled by a black bear in 2020 outside a cabin in McKee Lake near Buffalo Narrows, Canada. The woman was talking to her father on a satellite phone when the horrific attack occurred. The last thing that the man heard was Blaise telling her 9-year-old son Eli to grab an antenna from inside the cabin. What followed was a series of gurgling noises, which Blaise's father described as very disturbing. He knew that bears had always wandered around the property, but there'd never been a problem. It's believed that from inside the cabin, Eli helplessly watched his mother get mauled by the beast. The woman's husband, Curtis, shot the bear dead and proceeded to give her CPR. However, by the time he'd intervened, she no longer had a pulse. Only a few minutes after the attack, Curtis called Blaise's father to tell him that she was dead. A GoFundMe was launched for Curtis and the children, which quickly rose to $40,000. Wildlife officers examined the bear's remains and found that its stomach was full of berries, meaning that the attack hadn't been driven by hunger. While the triggering factor remained unclear, it's likely that it had charged Blaise from behind and killed her within only a few minutes. Number 4. Atsushi Aoki. In 2016, a Japanese man used his karate skills to repel the attack of an Asian black bear, which is among the animal kingdom's most aggressive bear species. 63-year-old Atsushi Aoki was fishing at a creek in Gunma, northwest of Tokyo. The 6-foot bear pounced on him in what Aoki claimed to have been an unprovoked attack. It knocked the fisherman down and proceeded to repeatedly bite and claw him, inflicting wounds on his head and limbs. Aoki knew he had no chance of outrunning it. He managed to get back to his feet and assumed a karate stance, with his right fist in front of the bear. Aoki later told a media outlet how at that moment he'd thought to himself, "I kill him or he kills me." He delivered strikes to his attacker's eyes, prompting it to flee into the woods. Even though he was injured, Aoki managed to drive himself to the hospital. He even remembered to retrieve the fish he'd caught, which most likely had attracted the black bear in the first place. The Japanese media hailed the story as a triumph of man versus nature. However, wildlife authorities warned that defending against such predators with one's bare hands wasn't the best course of action. If confrontation is inevitable, pepper spray remains among the best deterrents. A bear the size of the one that Aoki had faced is considerably stronger and much more durable than a human being. The situation could have been far worse had it decided to continue its attack. Number 3. Peter Frankzak. In July of 2020, Peter Frankzak left his home in Red Lake, Ontario, to pick blueberries. When the 67-year-old didn't return as scheduled, the Ontario Provincial Police launched a search for him. Officers found the man's mangled remains with a black bear in the vicinity. It was shot and killed at the scene. A post-mortem examination concluded that Frankzak's injuries were consistent with a bear attack, but wildlife authorities suspected that it hadn't been predatory in nature. Bears are known to eat vast amounts of berries, meaning that Frankzak had most likely stumbled upon it while going for the same food source. Number 2. Maheshi Devi. In November of 2020, a couple from the state of Uttarakhand in northern India was attacked by a Himalayan black bear. They lived in Vadjuk village and had been cutting grass for cattle fodder in a nearby forest when the predator ambushed them. The woman, identified as 47-year-old Maheshi Devi, took the brunt of the attack. She sustained devastating injuries and died on the spot. Her husband, whose name wasn't released, survived the attack by climbing up a tree. According to a divisional forest officer, Devi's family was to be compensated in the aftermath. Wildlife authorities claimed that during the winter months, encounters between bears and humans tend to become more frequent as the bears come down from snowy higher reaches in search of food. Number 1. Patrick Cooper. In the summer of 2017, an Alaskan teenager was mauled to death by a massive black bear while taking part in a popular trail running race. 16-year-old Patrick Cooper of Anchorage had reached the halfway point of the race when he texted his family to say that he was being chased by the animal. Around the same time, Other runners were mobilized by the race's organizers to head back up the trail and look for survivors after a bear attack had been reported. The teenager's lifeless body was discovered about 500 yards from the trail. Once the alarm was raised with local wildlife authorities, a search operation was mounted, tasked with locating the animal. The 250-pound black bear suspected of having mauled Cooper to death was eventually found. Even though an officer had shot it in the face with a shotgun, the bear survived and managed to run off. It's unclear if the authorities were able to locate it or its remains again. Thanks for watching. Provided you were allowed to wear any protective clothing you wanted, would you rather endure the attack of a black bear or that of a Siberian tiger? Let us know in the comments section below.